I never thought a scrap of paper could cut so deep. The HOA slapped me with a $75 fine over the silver paint on my mailbox, petty smug, printed in bold. 48 hours later, their bank accounts froze under the weight of my law firm's motion signed with a pen they'd already tried to break. That's where it really began. Retirement was supposed to mean peace. I had left behind the long corridors of government buildings, the endless stacks of case files, and the clipped voices of people who never looked you in the eye. My days had settled into a rhythm. I liked coffee on the porch, raking leaves when the wind got bossy, and listening to Eli's laughter when my grandson stayed the weekend. That rhythm cracked the morning the certified envelope slid from my mailbox. The envelope was stiff, the kind with a green slip and an officious barcode. My fingers hesitated on the flap. The autumn air cut sharp against my face, and for a second I thought about leaving it unopened, stacking it with the grocery circulars. But curiosity won, and the chill deepened as I read the heading, Notice of Violation, $75. Fine. The offense, my mailbox. Apparently, the brushed silver paint I had slapped on it one Saturday afternoon was non-compliant with community standards. I read the phrase twice, then let out a short laugh that sounded too brittle for comfort. Across the street, old Mrs. Chandler had been raking leaves. She usually waved. This time, she just paused her rake, hovering midair. When my eyes lifted, she glanced quickly away, raking harder as though the ground had suddenly grown urgent. I folded the letter carefully as if the creases might hurt less if they were neat. My hands didn't shake, but there was a twitch in my jaw I hadn't felt in years. Inside, Eli was sprawled on the living room rug with his coloring book. 10-year-old nose smudged with graphite, he looked up when I came in. "What's that, Grandpa?" "Just mail," I said, setting the envelope on the counter. I hoped he wouldn't press, but Eli had a way of sniffing out tension like a hound. His eyes wandered to the study behind me where sunlight glinted off the silver fountain pen resting in its stand. "That pen looks heavy," he said. "What's it for?" "Writing the kind of letters you don't forget." I answered too quickly. He shrugged, went back to coloring, and the silence returned. I carried the envelope to my desk. The pen waited there upright and gleaming, a relic from my years drafting memos that shifted policies. I remembered the way the nib had scratched across bond paper late into the night, leaving behind lines that could open or close livelihoods. It had been a gift from Sandra, my late wife, back when I thought the job gave me purpose. For years, since I'd let it sit untouched, more ornament than tool. Now I slid the violation letter into the drawer and set it beside the pen. They looked unnatural together, the gaudy paper with its bold type and the quiet weight of silver, the present accusing the past. I thought of the weekend chores I had planned, clearing gutters, fixing the porch light, but the tasks seemed smaller now. My gaze kept drifting to that drawer as though the fine had lodged itself under my skin. In the kitchen, Eli hummed while sketching superheroes. I leaned against the counter, staring at the smudge of ink on his fingertips. He deserved a grandfather whose biggest worry was whether the apple cider was too tart, not whether a committee of strangers could dictate the shade of his mailbox. I poured coffee, the bitter steam fogging my glasses. Outside, the cul-de-sac carried on kids pedaling bikes, leaves skittering, but I caught the shift in neighbors' eyes when they passed. A hesitation, a quick glance at my driveway, then a quicker look away. That's how it starts, I thought. Not with a bang, but with small cracks, fines that nibble at dignity, whispers that rewrite who you are. I returned to the study, opened the drawer once more, and let my hand hover between paper and pen. The instinct was to toss the letter, laugh it off. I had lived through bigger storms, budget hearings, legislative crossfire audits that went on for months. Surely a $75 mailbox fine wasn't worth my time, but my fingers didn't obey. Instead, I placed the letter neatly beside the fountain pen. Side by side, they looked like two chess pieces waiting for the next move. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the old wall clock. I felt the weight of years in that silence. The cases I'd closed, the compromises I'd made, the peace I thought I'd earned. All of it seemed suddenly provisional, vulnerable to the whim of a board I'd never met. Out on the porch, a gust of wind rattled the dried branches. Eli called for me to look at his drawing, but my eyes stayed fixed on the drawer. I hadn't touched case files in years. That letter made me wonder if I'd have to again. The flyers showed up overnight. I saw them first thing on my walk with the trash bin lampposts bandaged in paper edges dark with drizzle. In red block letters, mailbox lowering. Property values. The ink had bled where the rain hit, like the words themselves were embarrassed to be seen in daylight. Down the street, two more. One at the trailhead bulletin board. Another taped to the HOA's community pride sign with an arrow in case the irony wasn't loud enough. I peeled one from the lamppost by my yard and felt the glue tug at my fingertips. No signature, of course, just a clip-art mailbox and a list of vague standards. A car rolled past slowly, Mr. Patel in his Prius. He lifted a hand, then lowered it halfway, eyes slipping to the silver box at the curb. The tires hissed on wet asphalt. I stood there with the flyer sagging in my hand and felt the first hairline crack run through the quiet I'd made for myself. By afternoon, a new shape had sprouted on the streetlight across from my driveway, a small black camera zip-tied to the pole lens peering into my yard. It had a red glow, like a sleepy eye. I stared at it long enough for the drizzle to chill my collar. Grandpa Eli's voice behind me. "What's that blink a camera?" I said. "Like on YouTube, not that kind." He backpedaled on his scooter, frowning. When he turned to roll away, I caught the way his shoulders rounded the way kids do when they're trying to be smaller than a feeling. At pickup, his teacher mentioned a little scuffle by the bike rack. "The boys were teasing," she said gently. "Something about a mailbox. Eli didn't hit anyone, but he corrected them." She smiled like correction deserved a medal. I thanked her and pretended not to hear the pity in her voice. On the fridge that evening, Eli taped a drawing of a silver rocket ship. "It's not a mailbox," he said, cheeks red, daring me to disagree. "It's fast," I told him. "Faster than anything they've got." He nodded and went for cereal even though dinner was in 20 minutes. 10-year-olds measure courage in spoons. After he settled with a bowl, I carried one of the flyers to the study and set it beside the violation letter. The two papers looked like cousins, same tone, same smug Helvetica. The silver pen waited between them, catching the last of the cloudy light. I didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, I woke the old desktop, the one that still made a fan noise like a wheezy dog, and dug through an archive of emails I hadn't opened since retirement. Names from a former life rolled up the screen. Inspectors, analysts, press aides. Then a subject line stopped me, from Alan Keats. Subject: "If HOA nonsense ever comes up, call me." It was 5 years old. Half a joke at the time, I think. Alan had always had a lawyer's gift for sounding casual while shining a flashlight down dark hallways. I clicked it open and read the single line, "Covenants love to overreach. If they poke your fence, I'll bring a bigger stick." I smiled despite myself and starred the email. A mini avalanche of memories followed: late-night conference calls, half-eaten burgers at the Bloomfield Diner, Alan drawing boxes on napkins to explain liability. I closed my eyes, fighting the itch to pick up the phone right there. If I called, I knew where the road would lead Binder's Timeline's hearings. I'd promised myself a different life. When the rain broke, I drove to the Bloomfield HOA Center to see the board in person. The lobby smelled like copier toner and lemon cleaner. On a corkboard, someone had posted the design guidelines as if they were scripture-faded edges, pushpins rusting. I scanned the page for color rules, found the word harmonious repeated like a charm, and thought of my silver mailbox cheerfully refusing to harmonize. The receptionist had a nameplate that read Tina in a loopy font with hearts. She had the careful expression of someone trained to say the same sentence 5 times an hour. "Do you have an appointment? I have a mailbox." She offered the tight smile they must teach in HOA school. "A board member can speak briefly if one is available." It turned out one was. She came out in a crisp raincoat, hair pinned with military precision. "Trina Caldwell," she said, extending a hand just long enough to establish hierarchy. Her eyes flicked toward the flyer folded under my arm, then out the window toward my street. "You've got quite a campaign going," I said. "We value community standards," she replied. "When one home deviates, everyone pays. Is that a policy or a proverb?" She ignored that. "You're Mr. Hale. We've received concerns." The way she said concerns made it sound like I'd brought mold into the sanctuary. "About paint," I said. "On a box that cost $30 at the hardware store." "About cohesion," she corrected. "Cohesion is delicate." The camera's red blink found its way into my mind again. Delicate like zip ties. Delicate like glue on flyers. I brought my plat map. I said, tapping the rolled tube under my arm, "Just a question about the jurisdiction line." Her smile thinned. "We can email you the bylaws. I'd prefer the map." She glanced at Tina with hearts, then back to me. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Hale," which is bureaucrat for never. On the way home, I stopped by the county office and requested a copy of the recorded plat. The clerk at the window had a forearm tattoo of a mountain range that disappeared into his sleeve when he stamped the receipt. He slid the crisp printout toward me with a little nod that said, You're not the first. Back in my study, I unrolled the map across the desk. The paper made a dry crackle that sounded like winter grass. Lines, numbers, arrows. The kind of thing that used to steady me. I traced the shape of my lot with a finger, followed the easement border, and ran into the heavy line where the HOA's authority ended. It stopped short of my property, like a river meeting a cliff. The lamp hummed softly. Outside, a car door shut. Down the hall, Eli's pencil scratched over paper. The house did what houses do, breathed around me. There it was in black and white, the edge they didn't cross on paper, even if their flyers had crossed it on the street. The camera could blink all it wanted. It couldn't move a boundary line. I let out a breath I hadn't noticed holding and pressed my palm flat over the word "limit" printed at the border. Then I folded the plat with care and slid it into the drawer beside the violation letter and the flyer. The silver pen stood between them like a witness who'd seen this trick before. "If they want paperwork," I murmured, closing the drawer. I wrote half their playbook. The camera's red eye blinked through the rain as if it had heard me. I called Alan from the driveway so I wouldn't say the wrong thing in front of Eli. He picked up on the second ring with the same dry hello he'd used since 1998, like a man answering a courtroom door. "Keats," he said. "Tell me it's not termites. I only do paper pests. It's the other kind I said. HOA flyers. A camera with a red eyelid. A $75 personality test masquerading as a fine." He exhaled a laugh that had no humor in it. "Meet me at the diner, Ray. I'll bring a napkin big enough for a flowchart." The Bloomfield diner wore its neon like an old friend wears a favorite jacket frayed at the corners, still warm at the seams. The bell over the door clanged when we stepped in. Grease and coffee drifted up in a familiar handshake. Eli slid into the booth, first asked for crayons, and began colonizing the paper placemat with rocket ships. Alan arrived with the rain on his coat shoulders and a ketchup stain on his tie the size of a nickel. He didn't apologize for it. He just grinned, shook Eli's hand like he was a juror, and thumped a manila folder on the table. "What are we looking at?" he said. "A mailbox that refuses to harmonize." "Apparently," I said. "Flyers. A certified violation. A camera." He nodded, once eyes narrowing. "Classic manufacture of nuisance. Make the trivial look systemic, then call it cohesion. You bring your plat in the truck. Good, we'll need that. And we'll need to turn the lights on in their attic." He opened the folder and slid me a printout public records request. Community associations. It wasn't fancy county seal, a few boxes, an address, just enough official weight to change the shape of a conversation. "FOIA doesn't apply to every HOA in every state," he said, tapping the header with a finger, "but here they touch enough public stuff to qualify for a limited records regime. Meeting minutes, budgets, enforcement correspondence. The meat and potatoes. And the bones I asked. We'll see if they left any lying around." He pulled a pen from his jacket like a magician, then thought better of it and set it aside. "You still have that silver one?" "In the study," I said. "It's mostly ceremonial these days." Eli looked up. "Grandpa's pen could win in court," he announced, matter of fact. Alan winked. "I've seen lesser pens do it." The waitress filled our coffee without asking and left 2 menus we weren't going to open. Alan tore a napkin in half and drew boxes with arrows. Notice, response, records, request, audit. He added a second arrow under records freeze if cause. My eyebrow went up. Freeze. He leaned back, letting the neon buzz frame his smile. If the numbers don't match the bylaws, if they're engaging in bad faith enforcement, if a judge thinks the money's safer in timeout while we look under the hood, yes, it's rare, not impossible. A family of 4 squeezed into the booth behind us. Their conversation turned to soccer schedules and a missing shin guard. For a minute, the diner felt like it always had small problems, warm fries, strangers you meant well toward. It calmed the part of me that wanted to slam a fist on the table and ask who exactly decided what was harmonious. Alan slid another sheet toward me. A sample, request for financial records and enforcement correspondence with blanks for dates, lots and signatory. "Fill this out clean," he said. "No speeches. 2 sentences max. I request records pursuant to, and please provide within statutory period." We let the paperwork do the talking. Eli tugged my sleeve. "Can I draw on your napkin?" "Not that one," Alan said, but he handed over a clean square with a flourish. Eli began outlining a silver rocket with an enormous pen for a nose. He labeled it Harmony in shaky block letters. The H leaned like it had someplace better to be. "You'll get pushback," Alan went on, voice low. "They'll tell you to attend a meeting first to submit questions ahead of time to be neighborly. Don't argue, smile, resend the request. If they lose, deliver a second copy by certified mail. The moment they slip wrong date missing attachment, we build the staircase. Outside the window, the neon sign flickered again. A waitress set down a plate in the next booth, and the binder spine of her server book creaked as she twisted to pour ketchup. The little noise pulled a memory into focus, the feel of my own binders at the agency, the way a clean spine promised order in a world allergic to it. "Tell me if I'm overreacting," I said. "It's a mailbox." Alan's eyes were kind, but exact. "It's never a mailbox. It's a lever. They want to see if it moves you. Feels like it's moving everyone else instead," I said, picturing the flyers sagging in the drizzle and the camera's red blink. He nodded. "That's the point." A mini panic light and quick ran across my ribs, the old adrenaline that used to arrive when a case turned political, when a misfiled memo could tilt a week. I breathed it down with coffee. "All right," I said. "We do it your way." He clapped his hands once quietly. "Good. Step 1, we assemble what you've already got. Fine letter. Photo of the camera. A couple of those tasteful flyers. Plat map. I want everything in one place numbered like we'd hand it to a stranger who doesn't care about our feelings." Eli slid his placemat toward Alan. "Do you need this too?" Alan studied the rocket ship. "I'll allow it as Exhibit A in the court of good taste." We laughed, and laughter felt like a window opened in a stuffy room. Back at the house, I carried a blank black binder from the hall closet to the dining table. The cover had a faint scuff where a label used to be. I wiped it with my sleeve until the plastic shone. Then I set out the pieces Alan had named the certified violation with its officious barcode. A flyer still tacky with glue, a color printout of the camera on the streetlight, the county plat map, a sticky note with the HOA Center's front desk number, and the sample records request my name pre-filled and trembling only a little where the pen had found the line. Alan stood at the head of the table like a conductor. "Fine letter first," he said. I slid it into a sleeve and clipped it in. The binder's spine creaked the sound of something beginning. "Flyer," he said. "Sleeve clip. Camera photo. Sleeve clip. Plat. Sleeve clip. Template. Sleeve clip." Eli leaned his chin on the table and watched like we were building a ship in a bottle. "Is there a page for the pen?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "It lives outside the binder. For now." Alan closed the covers, squared the edges with his palm, and looked at me over the top. The ketchup stain on his tie had dried into the shape of a small country. Next, he said softly, "We date the request and walk it in. No speeches?" I nodded. My hand went to the study without thinking, the muscle memory of 1,000 memos. The silver fountain pen stood in its cradle, catching the last lean of evening light. It felt heavy in my fingers, the way real things do. Back at the table, I uncapped it. The nib made a tiny click against the rim. I hesitated, then set it down again. Alan smiled like a man who loves a well-timed pause. "When the time comes, re-sign with that pen. Make it count." The binder sat between us, black and square, humming with the quiet dignity of order. Outside, the camera's red eye watched the street. Inside, Eli added a tiny mailbox to his rocket, painted it silver with a crayon, and drew stars around the word harmony until the paper shone. They didn't knock. Shoes crunched across the gravel, quick and certain. By the time I opened the door, Trina Caldwell was already climbing my walk with a clipboard. A younger man, tall, nervous, waited at the curb, hugging a folder. "Afternoon, Mr. Hale." Trina said, breath fogging in the winter air. "Mailbox inspection. That's scheduled," I asked. "Community response." Her papers flapped in the wind as she steadied them. The younger man lifted a hand. "Kyle Vance. New chair." His voice was almost apologetic. Behind me, Eli whispered, "Don't let them break it, Grandpa." His eyes darted toward the silver pen on my desk. Inside, I told him softly. We stepped onto the porch together, the three of us, and the cold. The mailbox stood under the streetlight, nothing more than a painted box, but today treated like evidence. "Non-compliant finish," Trina said. "Reflectivity beyond harmonious range. Tilt outside tolerance." "It's the sun," I replied. "And city grading." Kyle almost smiled, but Trina only scribbled another checkmark. She snapped a photo, the camera flash bouncing off the silver. Across the street, Mrs. Chandler paused on her porch cardigan, clutched, then turned away. "Cooperation, noted," Kyle murmured. "Authority's the issue," I said. "Which we have," Trina countered. Her clipboard bumped the folder in my hand. Papers slid. In the shuffle, the silver fountain pen slipped free. It fell point first onto the porch step. Snap. The nib sheared off with a sound like a chipped tooth. My stomach lurched as if the cold had struck inside me. Eli burst from the doorway before I could stop him. He scooped the pen with both hands. "It broke," he whispered. "I see it." Trina's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Delicate items don't belong at the entry," she said, tone smooth, almost kind. I crouched, picked up the tiny shard from the cement, and set it in my palm beside the body. Still silver, still heavy, but wrong now, mute. Mrs. Chandler shifted again, cardigan creaking. She looked at me, wanted to move, then turned back inside. "We'll file this as a second notice," Trina said. 10 days to cure." Kyle winced at the pen in my hand. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "It happens," I replied, voice even. They retreated toward the curb. The clipboard's paper rattled in the wind, Kyle trailing behind his apology, hanging like frost. Eli pressed closer. "Can we fix it? We'll try." I dropped the nib into an empty mint tin, laid the body beside it. My hands stayed still only by will. Inside, I set the broken pieces on the desk. The request form Alan had given me peeked from the bent folder, still blank. Across the street, a curtain fell shut, neighbors choosing silence. The camera's red light blinked indifferent. Eli's voice caught. "They broke it. They knocked it," I said, because accuracy was the only shield I had. Gravity did the rest. His eyes filled with something heavier than anger. "It's not fair." "No," I answered, closing the door on the cold. I picked up the pen again, heavier for its wound. My reflection wavered in the silver barrel. "If they want ink," I whispered, "I'll give them all they can handle." The final notice was the color of a traffic cone and twice as loud. Someone had taped it to my dented mailbox at sunrise, the glue still tacky in the heat. Fines doubled across the top in the block letters, and beneath it in smaller print that pretended to be polite. Failure to comply may result in court action. The paper crackled when I peeled it off, leaving a rectangle of clean metal like a bandage tan. Late summer pressed down like a wet hand. By 9, my shirt clung to my back. Eli trailed me to the truck quiet in a way that made me miss his noise. We drove with the windows cracked because the air conditioning in my old Ford liked to negotiate before it worked. At the Bloomfield County Records Office, the lobby smelled of floor wax and photocopier heat. The clerk at the window forearm tattoo of a mountain range disappearing into his sleeve slid a form under the glass. "Public records request," he said, voice easy, like he'd recited the phrase all week. "Association-type dates, specific records. The more precise, the better." "My kind of language," I said. My pen hovered, then I borrowed one of his because mine felt like superstition now. I kept the sentences short the way Alan taught me dates, subject enforcement correspondence, budgets, minutes. I initialed each page and watched his embosser press the county seal into the corner, the paper rising in a crisp ring like a small moon. "How long?" I asked. "Statutory period is 10 business days," he said, then dropped his voice. "Sometimes sooner if the copier doesn't melt." It was only half a joke. The copier burped a warm, chemical breath as we left. When we got home, the afternoon sagged. Eli hovered with a book he didn't read. I taped the final notice flat on the study table, the bright orange daring me to blink first. My phone buzzed. "Alan," I said. "You delivered it, stamped and sealed." "Good. Brace. They'll try neighborly first call you to talk it out. Don't. Smile, restate the request, hang up." I glanced at the orange notice. "What if they jump to teeth? Then we put ours in," he said, and the line clicked with his confidence. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived, edges still damp with copier ink that smudged my thumb. The county seal sat raised and sure in the corner. The weight of it felt like a book you meant to read for years and finally had to. I slid it open with a butter knife and slid out a stack. Emails, minutes, budget pages clipped together with a county paperclip heavy enough to anchor a kite. I didn't want Eli to see me read them, but he had a sixth sense for important paper. He perched on the arm of the chair, knees jiggling. The first pages were dull, the way bureaucratic truth can be, dates, pleasantries, agendas. Then a subject line blinked out of the gray enforcement strategy. Langley Mailbox. The email thread ran long forwarded CC'd the digital equivalent of people leaning in doorways to talk about you. A paragraph halfway down from Trina snagged me by the collar. "He's bluffing. No one will check the codes. Keep pressure." There were other lines, public nuisance precedent, visual cohesion, but my eyes kept returning to that one the way a tongue returns to a broken tooth. My throat tasted metallic. The room felt smaller. Heat pushed at the window glass and wavered the street outside. I set the packet down too carefully, like it might explode if I let it drop. The phone buzzed again, this time a text from Eli's school. "PTA volunteer event, Saturday space limited." I scrolled, then stopped. Another line. To ensure community harmony, we're prioritizing households in good standing with neighborhood committees. A delicate way of saying certain doors were closing. Eli popped his head around the study door. Is the fair this weekend? Looks like it, I said, and kept my face neutral. Can we go? We'll see. I said the oldest lie parents tell when they need to buy time. He nodded slow, already tasting the no. Back on the table, the flyers had multiplied again as if humidity bred them. Someone had tucked one into my storm door and stapled another to the HOA's Community Pride Board. The camera's red blink across the street felt brighter in daylight like a pulse. I picked up the email packet again and read it all the way through slower. Each page left a small grit of anger under my tongue. The minutes showed votes that moved without pause, I, like a metronome. Budgets with lines for communications that had the same number every month as if nothing ever surprised them. Buried in a reply from someone I didn't know, first name only was a sentence that would have been funny if it weren't pointed at me. Once he pays others, fall in line. Something in me sagged. Not dramatically, not with a sound. More like a plank giving quietly under weight. I'm not proud of that moment. I thought about paying the doubled fine, then painting over the silver and pretending the whole thing was a misunderstanding I'd invented because retirement gives a man too much time to fight ghosts. Eli padded in barefoot and stopped short at the table. He didn't look at my face. He looked at the papers at the final notice at the orange daring us. Then his hand went to the black binder we'd started and he slid it across the table with both palms like presenting a tray. Keep going. Grandpa, he said. He didn't say it like a slogan. He said it like the day had its hand on my shoulder, and he wanted to put his there too. I opened the binder. The spine creaked honest as wood. Sleeve by sleeve, I added the pieces the orange notice, a flyer glue still tacky, the printout of the camera from across the street, and then one by one the emails the paragraph with "No one will check the codes" on top flagged. The room cooled an inch, or maybe that was only the feeling of air finding a new path. I picked up the phone and called Alan. They wrote it down, I said. Good, he answered. People who mean it always do. He started to outline the next steps, a certified letter short cover date of non-response if they stalled, but I only half heard him. My eyes stayed on the flagged paragraph on the casual cruelty of it. Somewhere beyond the blinds a lawnmower droned and a dog barked. Life continued, blessed, and here I was rearranging paper to make the world behave. After we hung up, I stood there with the binder open and felt the urge to slam it shut to feel the slap of plastic and the finality of it. Instead, I pressed the cover down slowly, Eli's small hand resting on top of mine for a second before he left it there, pressing the binder shut like a seal. They just handed me the rope to pull, I whispered. The camera blinked. The orange notice glowed in its sleeve. The county seal kept its embossed ring cool under my thumb. Outside, heat leaned on the house again, but something had shifted in the room. Pressure redirected. The headline landed before breakfast, Grandpa challenges HOA fine. It was in the Bloomfield Gazette bottom half of the front page, the kind of space usually reserved for bake sales and zoning disputes. Yet, there was my name shrunk into bold type. At the hardware store later that morning, strangers nodded. One man, near the lumber aisle, said only, "About time." I smiled thinly, carried my box of screws, and felt the shift in air my fight had slipped out of the shadows. That evening, Alan met me at the diner. The ketchup stain on his tie had become a trademark as if he kept it there for luck. He pushed a packet across the formica. "Motion for preliminary injunction," he said. "If the judge grants it, their accounts freeze until the audit finishes." I ran a finger along the edge of the paper. "That simple?" "It never is," he said. "But you've built the binder. This just opens the door. Your pen seals it." His eyes flicked toward the case I carried, the silver pen inside scarred nib wrapped in cloth. By the time we reached Town Hall, the spring air was restless. Windows open, crickets loud crowd louder. The hearing chamber buzzed with folding chairs and whispers. The microphone clicked as the clerk tested it, a sharp sound that made everyone sit straighter. Eli squeezed my hand before finding a seat in the third row. His legs swung above the floor sneakers, thumping softly against the chair rung. I caught the small crease in his brow, more serious than a 10-year-old ought to wear. The gavel knocked. Next item, Hale versus Bloomfield Homeowners Association. I rose, binder under my arm. Across the aisle, Trina Caldwell sat, stiff-backed, eyes hot enough to scald. Kyle Vance beside her chewed a lip, flipping through notes like they might rearrange themselves into courage. I set the binder on the table. The cover opened with that familiar creak of plastic rings loud enough in the hushed hall. I laid out the orange final notice, the flyers, and then the FOIA packet emails clipped and flagged. The damning line sat on top. "He's bluffing. No one will check the codes." Murmurs swelled like a tide. A man coughed. Someone else whispered. They wrote that Alan stood tie-crooked, voice steady. He read a statute number, no flourish. Another line from state law. The sound was dry as chalk but carried weight. Each phrase pulled the room tighter. Trina broke in, voice sharp. "This is a spectacle. He's manipulating order the chairwoman cut." Kyle looked down, palms flat on the table. His shoulders slumped as though the fight had already drained out. The judge, glasses low on her nose, tapped a page. "Mr. Hale, these records are authentic." "Yes, ma'am." "Obtained under FOIA, stamped by county seal." She nodded once. Then to Alan. "And the remedy, freeze of association accounts pending audit," Alan said. "Prevent further misuse until truth sorts itself." The pause was short but thick. Papers shuffled. The crowd held breath. "Motion accepted," the judge said at last. "Accounts are frozen until review is complete." The room broke. Gasps snapped through air. Someone clapped once, then stopped, uncertain of the rules. Trina's face drained of color. Kyle leaned back, glasses fogged, suddenly smaller in his chair. I felt Eli's gaze on me. When I turned, he gave a tiny fist pump, quickly hidden, but enough. The clerk slid the motion across pen space, blank. I reached into the case and brought out the silver fountain pen. The nib, still crooked, glinted under fluorescent light. A scar, not a flaw. The hall hushed as I set it down. For a moment I heard only the thud of my own pulse, the hum of lights overhead, the shuffle of someone shifting in the back row. I pressed the nib to the paper. Ink bled slow, deliberate, but it bled all the same. I signed my name. The sound of the pen scratching felt louder than any cheer. The envelope was cream-colored, the seal embossed with the same crest that had haunted my mailbox for 4 years. This time, though, the letter inside began differently, to the residents of Bloomfield. I read the words twice before calling Eli into the kitchen. He slid into the chair across from me, chin in his hands. I cleared my throat and read it aloud, each line deliberate. The HOA board admitted to overreach in enforcement and offered apologies for undue distress caused. It promised revisions to bylaws, more transparency, fewer fines. When I finished, the house was quiet except for the tick of the wall clock. Eli's eyes were wide. They actually said, "Sorry." They did. I said. My voice felt strange, carrying those syllables like trying on a shirt I hadn't worn in years. That weekend, the community fair spread across Bloomfield Park. Food booths lined the paths, the scent of cinnamon pies and pulled pork drifting between the trees. Children darted past with caramel apples, their laughter floating above the country band tuning guitars. I hadn't planned on staying long, just enough to let Eli feel like the neighborhood belonged to him again. But then Alan appeared near the gazebo holding a slim velvet case in his hand. Figured it was time, he said. His eyes carried the same cautious pride I'd seen in courtrooms decades ago. I opened the case. Nestled inside was the fountain pen. The body polished, the nib replaced and gleaming. It caught the sunlight in a thin flash. Eli leaned in so close his nose almost touched it. "It looks brand new." "It isn't," Alan said. "It's stronger. Steel tip, gold inlay. Won't snap so easy." For a long moment I just held it, the weight familiar, yet new. I uncapped it and set the nib against a scrap of paper Alan had folded into the case. Ink flowed smooth, no hesitation. My hand moved across the page. Rainer Hale, clean unbroken. Something in my chest loosened. For the first time since the porch step had chipped the nib, I felt whole. Around us, neighbors drifted closer, Mrs. Chandler, who once pulled her cardigan tight to avoid eye contact, now carried a pie. "Apple cinnamon," she said, cheeks flushed. "Thought you and Eli might like it." Eli grinned and took the plate. "Thank you." Others followed small talk, handshakes, nods that held apology without words. One man clapped my shoulder. Another simply said, "Glad you stayed." I didn't have speeches ready, just smiles, quiet acknowledgments, and the steady feel of the pen in my pocket. Near dusk, as lanterns began to glow along the path, Eli tugged at my sleeve. "Grandpa, can you sign something for me?" He produced a fair program wrinkled from his pocket. I set it against the picnic table and wrote his name beneath mine, letters looping steady. He watched each stroke as if it were magic. The microclimax wasn't the letter, or the pie, or even the apologies. It was the sound of nib against paper smooth, sure no fracture. A simple signature, but to me it felt like reclaiming years. Eli's face lit. "It's fixed," he whispered more to himself than me. I capped the pen, slid it back into its case. The lantern swayed overhead, music rolled gentle across the park, and neighbors lingered without suspicion. As we packed up to leave, Eli asked the question I knew was coming. "Will you use it to fix things for everyone?" The night air carried cinnamon and autumn leaves. I looked down at him, his eyes reflecting lantern light, and felt the weight of the pen against my chest. "We'll see," I said. My breath came steady like it hadn't in years. "We'll see." The invitation arrived in a plain envelope, but the county seal in blue ink made my hand pause before opening it. Inside, on crisp stationery, the words felt heavier than paper. "You are invited to address the Civic Forum on Neighborhood Governance." A smaller note was tucked behind it, scrawled in Alan's unmistakable hand. "Tell them how you did it." I set it down on the kitchen table where Eli was spreading out colored markers. Without asking, he tore a sheet from his pad, drew a crooked rectangle with a flag, and in thick block letters wrote Grandpa's Mailbox Commons. He taped it proudly to the battered silver box outside. The tape peeled a little in the cold, but the sign held. By February, the snow had crusted hard. Bloomfield quiet except for salt trucks grinding along the roads. The library auditorium filled fast the night of the forum. Fluorescent lights hummed and folding chairs squeaked as neighbors, officials, and a scattering of curious faces from other towns settled in. I stood at the podium, pen in the pocket papers, trembling just enough to notice. Alan sat in the second row, arms crossed, a faint smile under his mustache. Eli perched beside him, swinging his legs in restless arcs. When the moderator introduced me, the applause was gentle but real. I cleared my throat and began. "It was never about paint," I said, voice steady once I found its rhythm. "It was about dignity, about whether rules protect us or control us, about whether silence is peace or just fear dressed neat." I told them about the fine, the flyers, the cameras. Not in detail, just enough for the room to feel the weight. Then I held up the apology letter, its seal still raised, and let them see it catch the light. "I didn't win because I shouted louder," I said. "I won because I stood long enough for truth to stand with me." When I stepped down, the applause swelled. Some faces shone with relief, some with recognition, a few with the quiet shame of remembering their own silence. Later that week, I signed papers with the county clerk dedicating the strip of ground in front of my house as Mailbox Commons, a sliver of land marked for community use, not HOA jurisdiction. The silver box would remain protected as a symbol and meeting place. The pen gleamed as I signed its nib-smooth, no hesitation. I felt Alan's hand on my shoulder when the ink dried steady and warm. That evening, the neighborhood gathered for the first lantern walk. Children carried jars glowing with tea lights, parents cradled thermoses, and the line of people stretched down the cul-de-sac. Their steps, crunched on frozen gravel, laughter puffed into the night air. I stood at the gate, Eli beside me holding his lantern high. The silver mailbox caught the glow, shining softly, no longer a battleground, but a beacon. Neighbors passed, nodding, some touching the box as if to bless it. Mrs. Chandler whispered, "It looks beautiful," and left a folded note tucked in the flag. Others simply smiled, the kind of smiles that had been absent too long. The micro-climax came as I signed the final deed transfer under lantern light. The pen scratched gently, ink flowing smooth, while the glow of a dozen small flames reflected in its barrel. For a breath, the world stilled, the mailbox, the lanterns, my hand steady across the page. When I capped the pen, Eli leaned close, whispering, "It really is ours now." I nodded. It always was. Now everyone sees it. The lanterns swayed in winter air, the silver box glinting like a star fixed to earth. I thought of the first fine, the broken nib, the binder that nearly bent under its weight. And then I thought of this children's laughter ringing clear light dancing across neighbors' faces, the mailbox standing tall at the edge of the walk. The night closed soft around us. I let my breath rise in a cloud warm against the cold. The mailbox still stands, and so do I. The clerk's stamp landed with a solid thud, and the room seemed to breathe easier. My fountain pen, its nib mended and gleaming, slid smoothly across the final deed for Mailbox Commons. Justice, I've learned, prefers documents over noise, but it always leaves space for grace. What began as a $75 fine ended as a signed page, a restored mailbox, and neighbors finally free of whispers. If you've ever faced a notice that bent truth more than it upheld it, remember patient paper and steady friends can reset the balance. Where has your community found its quiet victory?